Smarties, we get asked all the time about how to get learners to read more. In this episode, we dig into some big ideas about reading. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 355 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we're talking about the topic of reading.
Dun, dun, dun.
And how to get them to read more. And I think this is an important topic because there's a lot of misconceptions about quantity and quality.
Yes, let's start there. What do you mean by that, Steph?
Well, I often hear parents say, oh, my child reads all the time, and then on assignment doesn't seem to understand or can't answer the questions. Mm-hmm. Or my child can do those questions but won't read outside of what is required, and I want them to read for pleasure more. And I think that's sort of what it boils down to. There's a misconception that reading all the time means you're a good reader, or not reading at all outside of what is required makes you not a good reader.
I think you could even extend it even further.
Yeah.
That kids and learners who read a lot, they're good learners. They're good students.
Yeah.
And kids who choose not to read all the time are somehow not.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So when you're talking about reading, the first thing I always ask parents when they bring this up with me, I say, tell me about the last book you read. Because the point is, parents want their learners to be good readers, but that behavior isn't necessarily modeled in the home. Time isn't necessarily set aside by the parent for that. And that is outside of reading a book with your kids. That's outside of that. Is what time is set aside for, hey, the TV needs to be off because I'm reading. Mm-hmm. We're not doing iPads right now because I don't want the noise because I'm reading.
Yes.
So acknowledging your own part in all of this and modeling reading for pleasure, modeling getting a new book. Because we all read on a tablet, or me, I'm a big audiobook listener.
Yeah, me too.
That is not necessarily something your kids see.
Right.
Unless you're talking about it. I'm going to go in my room and read my book now. I'm putting on my AirPod because I want to listen to my book. There are ways to incorporate it into the things that your children and kids bear witness to.
Yeah, and see what you're spending time doing and choosing to do.
Exactly.
And also keep in mind that if they are avoiding reading, there's a reason.
Yes.
But I also have a strong feeling about how we need to also not be so rigid about what they are reading. If they are rereading something that they've already read, or they're really into graphic novels, or things that you feel are very below their...
Or they like audiobooks.
Yeah, their reading level, and that feels like, they're in a higher grade. They shouldn't still be reading Dogman. Mm. There has to be an understanding of what the goal and the purpose is. And if there is time to read as a family on something that's harder, and they can just listen, and then they spend their own time doing something like reading a graphic novel, that is a good compromise so that everything is in moderation. It doesn't have to be all or none.
That's a really good point, is that there is a lot of judgment around reading enough, about reading level, about
what they're reading,
what the topic is of what they're reading. And I think you would agree, anytime they are interacting with language, with words, and in a graphic novel with story, that is affirming their reading and their comprehension skills. As we always talk about, there are two components of reading. One is the decoding piece, which is actually breaking down of sounds and putting them together to blend into words. And then the other is the comprehension piece. We have both worked with kids who are beautiful decoders.
Beautiful. Oh my. And have fooled everybody.
Fooled everybody and don't have the comprehension piece at all. And we both worked with learners who understand what they're being told, understand the plot and the story from the pictures or from people talking about it, but struggle with the decoding piece.
Yeah.
So if there is one part of this reading equation that is tricky for your kids, they are going to gravitate to the part that is easier. It does not mean you don't reinforce the part that feels hard. But if we are specifically looking for them to engage more, to read more independently, and to pick that as a go-to activity, then we have to release judgment about what that looks like.
100%. Can you say that last part again?
If we want them to read more independently, and to choose that as an activity for them to do, then we have to remove judgment of what they're reading, how they're reading.
Yeah. I just want that to sink in for a second, because that feels very powerful in whatever you are feeling as a parent, whether it's shame or whether it's pressure or whether it's lack of understanding or frustration, whatever the feeling is, understanding what is working or what the next step is to help get to that goal of whatever you want for your learner.
It's the bottom of that staircase. And when parents are talking to us, they're looking at the top of the staircase. They're looking at that landing. This is the ideal. This is what I want. Sometimes they don't know why they want it, but this is what they want. And we've talked about this before. Steph fooled people into thinking she could read.
Yep.
And I struggled until the end of second grade to learn how to read. And we're both accomplished college graduates with our master's degrees. Like, we have thrived, even though it was harder for us. The original sort of idea that sparked this episode was really about the idea of reading for pleasure, reading for purpose. And I think that's the underbelly of this episode of we need to acknowledge when we're reading for purpose. So reading for purpose is your high school English teacher assigned you Madam Butterfly. That is not something that was self-selected. That's not your personal choice. Even if they give you like 3 books you can read.
Yeah.
But you still have to pick.
None of them would be one. Yeah.
None of them would be one that you would have selected.
Correct. Yeah.
So understand that reading that book for purpose should be functionally different than reading a book for pleasure. And what I mean by that is reading for purpose. Are you writing an essay at the end? Do you need to pull quotes?
Yep.
Do we need to have the story unveiled to us sort of romantically and majestically? Or is it meaningful to know the story going into the book so you can immediately go where you need to go and be efficient and effective for what the purpose of that book or that reading that you are doing is?
Yeah, and the reading for purpose is also needing, for a lot of my students, needing a lot of extra summaries and extra reading around that book.
Yeah.
In addition to actually literally reading the story.
Exactly.
So there is more reading to be done when it's a purposeful reading.
Then you have reading for pleasure.
Yeah, a whole different ballgame.
It's a book that you self-selected. I talk all the time on the pod about how Sundays my dad would go to the library every week growing up. And he'd oftentimes bring me, oftentimes bring my brother. Sometimes he'd go alone. Or sometimes we'd ask him to get books for us. And he would. So that's reading for pleasure. That's finding the joy in it, finding the learning in it, and the pleasure of it.
It's true. And I have to say something about my mom, who I don't normally talk about very often on the podcast. But my mom was one of those people, she's always really liked stories. And she would read when she had time or on vacation or shorter things, shorter books, things like that. And I remember when audiobooks first came out, and I said to her, we had a favorite author. She and I both liked this author a lot. And I said to her, I had it on my phone or something. This was right when it first came out, being able to listen to an audiobook so easily. And I remember we were on a plane somewhere and it was a really long flight and we listened to most of the book on there. And ever since then, my mother literally every day spends several hours listening to books.
Yeah.
And that is one of her greatest joys. She reads all the books. And I think going back to, apples don't fall far from the tree, reading was hard for her. She's had glasses since she was 2, that kind of a thing. And having it be in this different platform for her changed everything. And so I'm putting that in as a side note of like, just that one little change is everything. And for you, if you're listening, and that could potentially, if you've never really thought about doing it a different way, and you literally think it has to be only reading physically and not just listening, it's still interacting with the story. It's still reading. Mm-hmm. Just looks different. So I want to say with all of that, just that whatever time you can spend enjoying and being with stories or learning and whatever that looks like, that's the goal.
With that, have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week.